Sergeant Brooks had already done this dozens of times. A black woman, alone, standing on a deserted stretch of Interstate 95 amidst curves and tall grass in Florida. No witnesses, no cameras, no backup, just him, his uniform, and the power he believed he possessed. He knew how these scenes usually ended. She would argue, say she knew her rights, perhaps raise her voice. But, in the end, she would give in. They always did. But Elena Rivera wasn't one of the others. He saw a defenseless civilian. He didn't see the U.S. Army major, trained to lead under fire, to maintain calm in chaos, and to act with surgical precision when everyone loses control. He didn't recognize the gaze of someone who had commanded troops in conflict zones, nor did he perceive the strength of someone who had learned that respect isn't asked for. It's earned. Every order he gave, every threatening word, pushed him deeper into his own abyss. And when he crossed the line, trying to exert a power he never truly had, Sergeant Brooks not only chose the wrong person, he lit the fuse of a fight that would end everything for him. Before we continue this story, please comment on which city or country you are watching from. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time. This is just the first twist in a story that will surprise you. The afternoon sun cast golden streaks across the silent stretch of Interstate 95 as Major Elena Rivera drove her black Chevy Tahoe back home. The continuous sound of tires on the asphalt was almost therapeutic, a steady rhythm after a long day at the ceremony honoring U.S. Army veterans. He was dressed simply, yet elegantly, a navy blue blazer over an impeccable white blouse and tailored trousers. His military uniform was carefully folded inside the garment bag on the passenger seat. The insignia and medals marking his rank remained stored away, as he always did when leaving the base. Suddenly, a flickering light in the rearview mirror shattered the peace. Red and blue lights flashed and approached rapidly. Elena frowned. She hadn't been speeding, hadn't made any dangerous overtaking maneuvers, nor had she broken any traffic rules. Even so, the police car wasn't slowing down. On the contrary, it was signaling for her to pull over. She sighed, maintaining control. She slowed down, signaled, and pulled over to the side of the road. Decades of experience had taught her to remain calm, take a deep breath, and react with discipline. But at that moment, something inside her felt wrong. There was no justification for that approach. None. The steady sound of boots on the gravel announced the approach of Sergeant Brooks. He was burly, broad-shouldered, with an expression of calculated authority. His badge gleamed in the golden light of the late afternoon, and the glance he cast at her window left no room for doubt. There was no professional curiosity there. Only the old, disguised disdain that Elena knew so well. "Driver's license and vehicle registration," he ordered in a curt tone. Elena moved slowly, making each gesture deliberate. She took out her driver's license and held it out the window. "Is there a problem, Sergeant?" he asked calmly. He barely glanced at the document before staring back at her face with that cold, assessing look, as if he expected the wrong reaction. "Get out of the vehicle," he said curtly. "Excuse me?" Elena raised an eyebrow. "Get out of the vehicle," he repeated more slowly, in a tone that sounded more like a provocation than an order. She took a deep breath, maintaining control. "May I know the reason for the stop? I wasn't speeding. I didn't make any illegal maneuvers. I was within my lane." "Suspicious behavior," he replied, flashing a crooked smile, the kind of expression that doesn't belong in a routine encounter. "Leave now." Elena had seen this before. He knew exactly what it was, harassment disguised as authority. Even so, he remained rational. He unlocked the door, opened it slowly, and went out, keeping his hands in sight. Sergeant Brooks walked around the truck, examining the interior with feigned attention before turning his gaze back to her. "Where are you going?" he asked. "Home," he replied calmly. "I just came from a military ceremony." His gaze narrowed. "Military, is it?" he murmured, letting out a muffled laugh. "And what exactly do you claim to be?" Elena raised her chin, her tone firm and controlled. "I am Major Elena Rivera of the United States Army." The silence that followed was short, but heavy. The sergeant examined her again, slowly, as if he wanted to savor the moment. "Oh, really, Major?" he said sarcastically, drawing out the word. "Are you sure about that?" Elena kept her gaze steady. "Yes, I have." He let out a short laugh. "And where is your military ID, Major?" Elena reached into her blazer pocket. Nothing. She frowned, checked the other side, then took out her wallet and opened it, searching among the compartments. The emptiness made her hesitate. This never happened. She always carried her ID. He mentally reviewed the last moments of the day. He remembered leaving it stored with his uniform at the base. The moment he realized this, his gaze met the sergeant's. "I don't have my military ID with me, but I can—" "How convenient," he interrupted, with the same venomous smile. "And look at this." He twirled his driver's license in his hand, slapping it against his palm. "It doesn't list me as a veteran either. Interesting, don't you think?" Elena maintained an upright posture, refusing to show irritation. "This is my vehicle. The registration document is in the glove compartment. Feel free to check it." "I'll check much more than that," he replied, walking past her towards the car. She turned around immediately. "You have no reason to search my vehicle." "Suspicious behavior is reason enough," he retorted, with a half-smile of disdain. "And I must say, you're acting quite nervous." The way she pronounced nervosa made it clear. It wasn't respect. It was provocation. Elena clenched her teeth. He had faced men like this before, men who believed that a uniform gave them the right to humiliate anyone. Major Elena Rivera knew she had two options: argue and make the situation worse, or back down and play a different card. And Elena Rivera never played to lose, because the moment that man crossed the line, and she knew it would, she would be ready. Her breathing remained controlled, but her pulse quickened. As she watched Sergeant Brooks slowly walk around his Chevy Tahoe, she mentally reviewed every detail. His military ID wasn't in his jacket pocket, nor in his wallet. Then it dawned on her. She had left it in the inside pocket of her uniform, stored in a locker at the United States Army base. When he looked up, he saw him a few meters away, arms crossed, body relaxed, but with a firm gaze. The gaze of someone who wasn't seeking justice, but rather to prove a point. Elena straightened her shoulders, adjusted her blazer, and maintained a firm tone. "As I said, I am Major Elena Rivera of the United States Army. My identification is on my uniform, kept at the base." Sergeant Brooks let out a long, mocking whistle, shaking his head slowly. "Really? And you expect me to take your word for it?" "That's the truth," she replied without hesitation. He turned the driver's license between two fingers, as if savoring an opportunity. "Funny," he said ironically. "I don't see Major written anywhere. No military status, no rank, nothing to corroborate this story." He clicked his tongue, amused. "You'd think a real soldier would make a point of showing it off." Elena didn't take the bait. She had met too many men like him, men who confused authority with power and who looked at her skin and saw a target, not a citizen. "Your command needs access to a database," she said calmly. "Look up my name. You'll see my history." "Dee," the sergeant let out a muffled laugh, full of disdain. I could, but I don't feel like it." The smile widened, venomous. "I like to do things the old-fashioned way. So, how about this? Get out of the car." Elena's eyes narrowed. "I already obeyed when you asked me to stop. Now you're crossing the line for no reason at all." "Madam," he said with feigned patience, his tone measured and cold. "I asked politely. Don't make this more difficult than it needs to be." Elena didn't move. "I'm not leaving unless you give me a legitimate reason." The ironic smile vanished from his face, replaced by something much darker. "He is refusing to obey a police order." "I am refusing to comply with an illegal request," she corrected, her voice firm and controlled. "You have no just cause to search my vehicle, and you certainly have no reason to detain me." The sergeant let out a theatrical sigh, tapping his fingers on his belt. "Look, this is where things get complicated. A driver refusing to comply with a police order, that sounds like resisting arrest." He clicked his tongue. "And believe me, things can get ugly very quickly." Elena kept her gaze fixed, but she sensed the change in the air. He wasn't bluffing anymore. He wanted to provoke her, force her to react, justify what he had already decided to do. "You're not planning on arresting me, are you?" she asked, tilting her head slightly, her voice heavy with defiance. The sergeant took a step forward, lowering his voice. "I'm saying, Major, if that's indeed what you are, that refusing a direct order from the police never ends well." He moved closer, a whiff of arrogance escaping with each word. "And, between us," the smile returned, "I don't think you're special enough to deserve an exception." Elena understood the game. She had trained soldiers in psychological tactics, in how to identify manipulation, in how to disarm the enemy without firing a shot. He wanted her to lose control, to give him the perfect excuse, but she wouldn't give that gift. Instead, he held her gaze, unwavering. "I know my rights, Sergeant Brooks. I know exactly what you're doing, so either arrest me or let me go." The air seemed to split apart in silence. Brooks expected submission. He expected fear. But all he found was coldness and military discipline. That annoyed him. His hand tightened on the radio. His jaw clenched, his voice lower and more dangerous. "Let it be as you wish." Elena didn't move. The sergeant took a deep breath, frustration etched on his face. "She's under arrest," he declared curtly. She remained still, her breathing steady. He waited for a reaction, a tremor, a word, a look of fear, but nothing came. Irritation grew in his eyes. He raised the radio, his voice thick with superiority. "Dispatch, incident at 5:29 p.m. Send reinforcements to my location." Every word was rehearsed, strategic, thought out to construct the narrative that would protect him. Elena knew, and she simply replied, with surgical coldness, "You're making a mistake, Sergeant Brooks." Sergeant Brooks fastened the radio back to his belt and flashed a slow, provocative smile. "Really?" he said, tilting his head. "Because, as far as I know, refusing to obey the law is wrong." He gestured toward Elena's black Chevy Tahoe. "Now, if you'll excuse me." Major Elena Rivera did not move. "You have no just cause to search my vehicle." The sergeant stepped forward, his voice low, almost condescending, as if offering one last chance. "Even so, I'll search it." Elena's jaw clenched. That would be an illegal search. Brooks shrugged with a half smile. "You seem quite concerned about the law all of a sudden." "If there's nothing in there, there's nothing to worry about, right?" Before she could answer, he turned around and forcefully opened the driver's side door without even asking permission. Elena clenched her fists, forcing herself to remain still. Reacting would only give him what he wanted, a reason to make the situation worse. The sergeant leaned over, rummaging through the center console and glove compartment. Papers, documents, and personal belongings were carelessly thrown onto the passenger seat. His every move was slow, deliberate, abusive, as if he were determined to find anything that justified the abuse. "Is there some kind of business going on in that car, Major?" he murmured without looking at her. "Smuggling military equipment? Did you steal something from the base?" Elena let out a controlled sigh, her voice low and firm. "You are overstepping the mark." Brooks gave him a brief, disdainful look. "Madam, I see no limit whatsoever." He went to the passenger side, violently opened the door, and began rummaging through the compartments, opening her purse and scattering her belongings on the seat. Elena remained firm, motionless, her eyes following everything. Then, discreetly, he slipped his hand into his pocket, feeling the cold touch of his cell phone. He knew exactly what to do. Without saying a word, he turned slightly, taking a step back, and dialed a number from his contact list. He raised the device to his ear, his face serene. "This is Major Elena Rivera," she said casually. "I need a favor, right now." The sergeant continued searching, unaware that the game had changed. His frustration grew with each passing second. He hoped to find something, anything that would prove she was lying, that would justify him in his own conscience. But the more he rummaged through the Major's belongings, the less he found. He opened the glove compartment, rummaged under the seats, even in the rear compartment. Her personal belongings ended up on the floor, scattered like trash. Elena watched in silence, her expression unwavering. That disciplined silence infuriated him. He slammed the passenger door shut and turned around, his face contorted into a mocking grin. "Where is it?" he asked. Elena blinked, impassive. "Where is what?" "Whatever it is you're hiding. Forged documents, stolen goods, maybe drugs." He stopped, realizing the absurdity of what he was saying. Elena simply looked at him, her face serene, almost cold. "Is it over?" Brooks snorted, his eyes flashing. "Oh no, we're just getting started." He picked up the radio and pressed the button hard. "Dispatch requesting a K9 unit team for a full vehicle sweep. Possible presence of narcotics or irregular material." The radio crackled. A firm voice replied, "Unit 13, suspend action. You have an urgent call from Police Department headquarters. Connect immediately." Brooks frowned. "Headquarters?" he murmured. It didn't make sense. They had never jumped the chain of command like that before. Still holding the radio, he changed the frequency. "This is Sergeant Brooks. You can speak." There was a brief pause. Then a strong, sharp, military voice filled the channel. "Sergeant Brooks, this is Colonel Harlan Vance from Florida Police Department headquarters. What the hell do you think you're doing?" The sergeant froze. "Colonel," the voice roared from the other side, "are you listening to me or are you deaf? You are illegally detaining Major Elena Rivera, a highly decorated officer in the United States Army." Elena remained where she was, her gaze steady, her face serene. "You ignored protocol, conducted an illegal search, harassed a superior officer, and even falsely reported the dispatch." The voice continued, each word sharper. "Stop everything immediately and escort the Major to Internal Affairs for a formal apology." The sergeant swallowed hard. His hands trembled slightly on the radio. "Sir, "What was that?" interrupted the colonel, his voice merciless. "Are you going to tell me you didn't know who she was?" Brooks did not respond. Their eyes met. The weight of truth fell upon him like a runaway train. The radio crackled again. "Sergeant Brooks, you're wasting your time." The silence that followed felt like it weighed a ton. Elena said nothing. She simply took a deep breath, with the serenity of someone who has just regained control, and watched the enemy sink into their own arrogance. "Get in the vehicle, drive it to the barracks, and report to my office as soon as you arrive. You'd better pray that I don't have your badge by the end of the day." Colonel Vance's voice sounded sharp on the radio before the call dropped. Sergeant Brooks stood paralyzed, clutching the radio tightly, his blood boiling with humiliation. Major Elena Rivera stepped forward calm and unhurried. Her gaze met his, the same calm, unwavering, and disciplined look she had maintained from the beginning. "Is it over?" he asked, his voice firm and controlled. Brooks' jaw clenched so tightly it hurt. There was nothing to say. Without a word, he spun on his heels and marched toward the vehicle, opening the door with a sharp pull. "Come in," he murmured, without looking at her. Elena sighed, first gathering up her belongings scattered on the floor. He packed each item with the same precision as someone folding a military uniform, closed the door of his Chevy Tahoe, and walked toward the patrol car. He slid into the back seat not as a suspect, but as someone who was in control of the scene. Brooks slammed the door, grabbed the steering wheel, and sped off, tires screaming against the asphalt. Elena kept her gaze fixed ahead. "Drive carefully, Sergeant." He gritted his teeth, tasting the metallic flavor of his own anger. The drive to the police department headquarters was silent, broken only by the tense rumble of the engine. His hands gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles were as white as chalk. She, in the back seat, remained unperturbed, a statue of serenity and power. When they arrived at the regional headquarters parking lot, Brooks could barely wait for the car to stop. He turned off the engine with a jolt, flung open the door, and got out, his movements stiff as if trying to contain a collapse. Elena descended with the same firm and calculated step, her gaze fixed, her posture impeccable. As soon as they crossed the threshold of the barracks, the atmosphere changed. The police officers who were typing on their computers discreetly raised their eyes. Some whispered amongst themselves, others looked away, as if afraid of being mistaken for him. The reception officer simply pressed the intercom and announced in a subdued tone, "She arrived." Elena noticed the weight on the sergeant's shoulders. He knew what awaited him. A few seconds later, Colonel Vance appeared in the doorway of the office, a grey-haired man with a square jaw and a cold gaze, walking down the hallway like an authority figure who doesn't need to shout to be heard. "Major Rivera," he greeted with respect and firmness. Then he turned to Brooks. "My office now." The sergeant hesitated for a brief moment, long enough for the colonel to raise an eyebrow in a gesture that needed no words. Brooks swallowed hard and went inside. Elena followed him, maintaining the same measured pace. The door slammed shut with a sharp click. The silence in the office was thick, almost physical. The sergeant remained at attention, but his hands trembled slightly. Elena sat down, crossing one leg over the other, her posture impeccable. Colonel Vance placed both hands on the table, his gaze stern. "I want to know what on earth made you think that searching and detaining a U.S. Army major was a good idea." Brooks took a deep breath. "Sir, she refused to obey. She had no identification, and her driver's license didn't list her as a member of the military. How was I supposed to know she wasn't lying?" The colonel narrowed his eyes. "You know how? By following protocol, by verifying her name, by doing your job and not by harassing a superior officer because you felt threatened by her." Elena watched in silence, her expression serene. The sergeant looked like a rope about to snap. "Sir, with all due respect." "Spare me this," he murmured, his voice tense. Vance leaned forward, his voice icy. "Do you have any idea what trouble you've gotten me into? The Department of Defense called me. You've embarrassed the entire department." Brooks' face paled, his fists clenched at his sides. Elena remained motionless, as if the air in the room weighed only on him. The colonel took a deep breath and turned to her. "Major Rivera, on behalf of the police department, I offer my formal apologies for what happened. This should never have happened." Elena nodded. "I accept your apology, Colonel, but I hope to see real changes in procedures so that this never happens again." "Understood," he replied confidently. Then he turned to the sergeant. "Apologize." Time stood still. Brooks froze, his fists clenched, his nostrils flared, but there was no way out. Slowly she turned to Elena. The voice came out hoarse and bitter. "My apologies." She kept her gaze steady. "For what reason?" she asked, calmly but sharply. The question hung in the air like a sentence. He lowered his gaze, and for the first time understood that the power was no longer with him. Sergeant Brooks's jaw clenched so forcefully it seemed to grind. He knew exactly what Major Elena Rivera was doing, and he hated it. "I apologize," he murmured through gritted teeth. "Colonel," interrupted Colonel Vance, his tone firm and sharp. "Because of the inconvenience." The colonel's voice cut through the air in the room like a blade. "Try again." Brooks swallowed hard, his throat trembling. "I apologize for my actions today. I was wrong." The words sounded harsh, venomous. "It won't happen again." Elena watched him intently. The words were there, but the regret was not. She didn't need that. She had already won. Colonel Vance exhaled sharply. "Effective immediately, Sergeant Brooks. You are suspended pending review. If it were up to me, your badge would already be on my desk tonight. You're lucky I didn't do that." The blow hit the nail on the head. Brooks lowered his eyes, his face burning with humiliation. Elena stood up, smoothing her dress jacket with slow movements. "Thank you for your cooperation, Colonel." Before leaving, he glanced quickly at the sergeant, who shifted uncomfortably under the weight of his own failure. "You set a trap for me," he murmured, tense. She arched an eyebrow, serene. "I didn't need to." His nostrils flared. He was on the verge of losing control, unable to bear the loss of the power that had defined him so much. Elena tilted her head slightly. "I warned you that you were making a mistake." Vance's gaze turned to his subordinate. "I don't want to hear another word, Brooks." The sergeant closed his mouth, but the look in his eyes was clear. This was not over. Elena knew what that meant. Men like him didn't let things slide. And that meant only one thing. She needed to be ready. The following morning, the sky began to clear over Interstate 95. Major Elena Rivera slid into the driver's seat of the black Chevy Tahoe, letting out a long sigh as she adjusted the rearview mirror. The air was crisp, and the rising sun tinged the track with golden hues, casting long shadows across the asphalt. The soft hum of the tires created a calm soundtrack, but Elena never confused calm with safety. After so many years in the United States Army, he had learned a simple truth. Men like Brooks don't accept humiliation. They just fight back. Some men learn from failure. Others allow themselves to be consumed by it, feeding on their own anger and resentment that they cannot control. And Sergeant Brooks was exactly that type. He had lost something he never imagined he would lose: his authority, his control, his ability to intimidate and be obeyed. And men like that don't forget. They wait for the right moment. Elena already knew the pattern. The way he clenched his teeth so hard it looked like he would break them. The way his fists trembled against his legs. His entire body exuded pent-up fury and a toxic desire for revenge. But she wouldn't change her routine out of fear of him. For a moment, he thought about changing his route, avoiding that stretch of road. But the idea died as quickly as it came about. Avoiding that route would be giving him the power to dictate his steps, and that's unacceptable. She hadn't done anything wrong, and I wouldn't start acting like I did. He followed the same route as always, the steering wheel firmly in his hands, his gaze attentive, his mind alert but calm. The horizon stretched wide and silent, the road almost deserted, except for a few trucks and cars heading to work. The constant sound of tires against the asphalt filled the surrounding space until a reflection made her look in the rearview mirror. A black sedan with tinted windows appeared in the distance, changing lanes smoothly and staying behind her. Nothing alarming, but something wasn't right. Minutes before, he had been coming from far away, mixed in with the traffic. Now, he remained there, in the same lane, at the same distance, as if mirroring her every movement. Elena did not react immediately. No sudden changes, no prolonged gazes, but his senses were on high alert. The car wasn't trying to overtake or slow down. It was just going through the motions, constant, calculated. Elena exhaled slowly, her body calm but her mind on high alert. I knew what was coming, and this time I wouldn't expect the threat to reveal itself on its own. If it were just a coincidence, another driver on the road going to work, the car would have already changed lanes, accelerated, or continued on its way. But it didn't happen. Instead, the black sedan with tinted windows began to approach slowly, in a calculated manner. Major Elena Rivera's fingers moved slightly across the steering wheel, not out of fear but out of analysis. It was all too precise. No ordinary driver would spend that much time in another vehicle's blind spot, maintaining such a precise distance without signaling or overtaking. And then, without warning, the car accelerated. It wasn't a natural change in speed. It was a sudden, aggressive step made to quickly close the distance to force her. Elena sensed it even before she saw it. His body reacted before his mind could finish its reasoning. His combat instincts, honed over years in the United States Army, kicked in like a perfect reflex. She knew that wasn't impatience, it was an attack. Her gaze went to the side mirror, and there he was. Sergeant Brooks out of uniform, his face distorted by rage, his eyes wide, his hands gripping the steering wheel with inhuman force. This time there were no badges, no hierarchy. There was no veneer of authority protecting him. There was only pure hatred and a pathetic need to regain control. Elena took a deep breath, her pulse steady, her mind cool. He knew that this made him dangerous, but also reckless. The sedan moved forward, encroaching on the side lane, attempting to push the Chevy Tahoe onto the shoulder, forcing it off the road. But Elena didn't react with fear. He didn't brake suddenly. He didn't turn the steering wheel desperately. I wouldn't give him the pleasure of seeing her lose control. She let the vehicle skid just enough to make it look vulnerable, a perfect performance, and he took the bait. The moment Brooks tried to block her from the side, Elena activated her turn signal, simulating an attempt to escape. The gesture was enough to convince him that she was panicking, and that was his mistake. At the last second, she turned the steering wheel with precision, swerving in the opposite direction. The sound of tires screeching against the asphalt cut through the air. The sedan rocked violently, Brooks trying to regain control, but it was too late. Elena kept her gaze fixed, cold, analytical, observing each of his failed attempts. He couldn't accept defeat. He pressed harder, moving forward again, the car shaking from side to side, now more erratic, more wild. The chase continued, the two cars zigzagging along Interstate 95 South, the scene becoming increasingly hostile. The road signs began to thin out, the asphalt narrowed, and the road soon gave way to a rural stretch near the Everglades, surrounded by tall trees and sharp curves. Elena realized it immediately. He had led her there on purpose, but what he didn't know was that she had followed him of her own free will. Further ahead, the road made a sharp, narrow turn with no traffic, no witnesses, an isolated setting, ideal for those who want to attack or for those who want to finish a game. Elena slowed down, her hands firmly on the steering wheel. The engine roared at idle, the sound echoing among the trees. The air felt heavier, a thick silence filling the space between the two vehicles. The sedan stopped first, abrupt braking, tires scraping on the hot asphalt. The door slammed open, and Sergeant Brooks jumped out of the car, his steps heavy, his body tense, anger vibrating in every muscle. Elena braked gently, stopping a few meters from him. Calm breathing, a fixed gaze. The morning sun streamed through the treetops, painting the asphalt with golden streaks and dense shadows. The silence was total, only the distant sound of birds and the muffled roar of engines cooling down. She exhaled slowly, her shoulders relaxing as if preparing for an inevitable battle. Ahead, Brooks advanced, without uniform, without rules, without brakes, but she was no longer the woman standing by the side of the road, a victim of an unfair approach. Now she was the enemy he couldn't control. And on that forgotten road near the Everglades, the hunter finally realized that he had become the hunted. "You think you're clever, don't you?" Sergeant Brooks' voice echoed through Interstate 95 South, breaking the heavy morning silence. The tone was laden with venom and resentment, as if each word spat out was a reflection of his own ruin. "Do you think this little game of yours means you've won?" Major Elena Rivera did not respond immediately. She simply watched him, analyzing every detail. His clenched fists, his heaving chest, his jaw tense as if rage were about to tear his skin from the inside. She already knew. From the moment he left the police department headquarters, he sensed that he wouldn't let it die. Everything he had lost, respect, uniform, authority, now consumed him like fire in dry wood. With a calmness that only military discipline can teach, Elena unbuckled her seatbelt, opened the door of the Chevy Tahoe, and stepped out into the fresh air. The morning was silent. The birdsong seemed distant, muffled by the palpable tension that was building in the air. She closed the door gently and turned around, meeting his gaze. "If I remember correctly," she said in a controlled voice, "it was you who followed me." The sergeant let out a dry, humorless laugh. He ran a hand over his face, exhaling frustration. "Follow you? Is that what you call it?" He took a step forward, his eyes flashing. "I call it correcting a mistake." Elena raised an eyebrow. "And what mistake would that be?" His teeth clenched, and his voice came out hoarse. "Letting you leave that barracks as if you had won, letting you humiliate me, letting you think you can defy authority and not pay the price." He took another step, his voice lowering, filled with hatred. "Do you think you made me look weak? That you exposed me in front of everyone?" Elena stood firm, her gaze fixed and unwavering. "You did this all by yourself." His face darkened. The smile vanished, replaced by something darker. The expression of a man who had lost everything and blamed the world for it. "You don't understand, do you?" he growled. "People like you think they can walk around as if they're untouchable. Do you think that just because you made that call and involved the right friends, you're better than me?" Elena took a deep breath. His voice came out calm, firm, and sharp. "No, I think following the law makes me better than you." Brooks' nostrils flared. "Do you think that uniform meant anything to me? That I needed it to put you in your place?" Elena tilted her head slightly. "No. But it was the only thing preventing you from making a serious mistake. And now that he's lost her, he's in free fall." He let out a bitter, nervous laugh. "In free fall? You have no idea how much restraint I'm experiencing. I had to listen to people whispering, looking at me as if I were the problem, when all I did was fulfill my duty." He pointed at her, his finger trembling. "And you're just standing there acting like a heroine, thinking you can provoke and get away with it. Do you think you can keep putting on this act for everyone to see?" Elena maintained a serene expression and a balanced voice. "This isn't a game, Sergeant. It never was. You lost because you were wrong, and instead of accepting that, you chose to blame me." He took another step, closing the distance, his breathing uneven. "And you decided to play the victim, didn't you? The poor little major humiliated by the evil policeman. She made everyone see you as a heroine. She got what she wanted." Elena took a deep breath, and when she spoke, her voice was low and sharp as steel. "If I had gotten what I wanted, you wouldn't be here now." For a moment something crossed his gaze, doubt, perhaps regret, but it was swallowed by hatred. "You don't get to decide how this ends." His tone was a restrained roar. Elena straightened her shoulders. "No, but you can decide. You can get in the car and leave right now, before you do something you can't take back." His breathing became irregular, his chest rising and falling rapidly. Clenched fists, the whole body vibrating with anger, with loss, with a shattered pride. This is not how it's going to end. Elena let out a soft sigh and shook her head. So you are indeed as predictable as I imagined. The explosion came like a bolt of lightning. Brooks lunged at her, driven by a blind rage, his body heavy and uncontrolled. But Elena had already read it long before the first step, long before the first blow. That was no longer a chase. It was the end of a cycle, and she was ready to close it. Sergeant Brooks' movements were clumsy, driven more by anger than by technique. The kind of attack that comes from someone who has spent their life relying on intimidation and brute force, never on precision. Major Elena Rivera dodged with ease, a simple shift of weight, his body flowing with absolute control, and his fist cut through only empty air. The momentum itself propelled him forward, leaving him vulnerable for a moment. She could have ended it all right there. A sharp blow to the ribs, a precise elbow to the throat, a single kick to the knee would suffice. But it wasn't about defeating him. It was about making him understand. Brooks barely had time to recover before attacking again. Each movement was more uncontrolled than the last, his body driven by accumulated humiliation. The second blow came straight on, recklessly aimed at her chin. Elena dodged slightly, flowing to the side, her elbow advancing like a living blade, striking her ribs squarely. The impact echoed off the asphalt. He let out a muffled grunt, the air escaping from his lungs, but the blow only enraged him further. "You," he growled, turning away, his eyes burning. "You think you're better than me, don't you?" Elena did not respond. It wasn't necessary. She had already read it like an open book. A man without discipline, without self-control, without purpose. The next attack came from the desperation of those who have nothing left to lose. He lowered his body, trying to knock her over with his weight. He believed that if he could make contact, brute force would prevail. A mistake. Elena waited for the right moment. She let him come at her with everything. And then she rotated her hip with precision, her foot trapping behind his leg, using his own strength against him. Brooks's body hit the ground with a hard thud. The sound of the crash reverberated down the empty road. The air escaped his lungs in a hoarse groan. He was trying to understand what had happened, but it was too late. Elena took a step back, not out of fear, but to give him the illusion of control. She could finish him off with a single move. But that wasn't enough. He needed to feel defeat. Brooks coughed, staggering, his face contorted with disbelief. Anger and pride blinded him. "Is it finished?" she asked calmly. The words cut deeper than any blow. He clenched his fists, his knuckles chafed from rubbing against the ground. But he hadn't given up yet. With a low growl, he advanced again, feigning a dodge to the left and throwing a punch with his right. This time, less impulsive, more calculated, but still too slow. Elena grabbed his wrist in midair, twisting it with surgical precision. The dry snap of the tendon echoed down the road. Brooks fell to his knees, panting, his face contorted with pain. She leaned forward, her voice low and firm. "You really don't know when to stop, do you?" He gritted his teeth, trying to react, stretching out his free hand. Elena let out a short sigh, as if she were tired of the stubbornness. With a quick twist, he pulled his arm forward and knocked him down again, his heavy body hitting the asphalt with even more force. His head recoiled, his vision blurring. The sound of the impact was the sound of a lesson being learned the hard way. Elena stood still, watching his body contort, watching the moment when understanding began to dawn on her, the bitter awareness of defeat. His pride was broken, but she knew men like Brooks never accept the end. The silence was thick, the only sound was the irregular rhythm of his breathing. And she waited, because I knew what was coming. Brooks groaned, turning to his side, trying to get up once more. His body trembled, but hatred still kept him standing. She knew what that movement meant. "It should have stayed on the ground," she said, her tone low and icy. But he didn't listen. Or perhaps he would hear it, and simply couldn't bear to accept it. Major Elena Rivera exhaled deeply, slowly rolling her shoulders as the cool morning air cut through the silence of Interstate 95 South. She had given him every opportunity to stop. Now she would end it. Sergeant Brooks spat blood onto the asphalt. His body no longer obeyed him, but his pride still kept him standing. His hands trembled, his chest heaved, and each breath seemed to steal more strength from him than it gave back. Even so, he did not accept the reality that surrounded him. Defeat was glaringly obvious, but he refused to see it. Elena maintained a firm posture, her eyes attentive, her breathing steady, analyzing him with the precision of someone who has faced chaos many times before. He was slower now. Anger spiraled out of control, giving way to something more dangerous, the despair of someone who realizes their power has vanished. "Stay on the ground, Brooks," she said calmly, as if giving a final warning. But he didn't know when to stop. He growled, his teeth clenched, forcing his exhausted body to rise, his fists clenched, fragile, trembling, but still defiant. It was pride speaking louder than reason. With a hoarse cry, he attacked, delivering a violent blow, throwing the last of his energy into a desperate attempt to bring her down. The impact came, hard, straight to her ribs. Elena felt the shock vibrate through her body. The pain was sharp, but familiar. She groaned softly, her muscles tensing reflexively, and then took a deep breath. I wouldn't give him the pleasure of seeing pain on his face. The sergeant saw the opening and threw another punch, this time hitting her jaw hard, making her head spin. But Elena had faced worse before. She knew what it was like to take a beating and keep standing. He knew what it meant to fight for survival, not for ego. And in that instant, she understood. He thought he was turning the tables, but he was only digging himself deeper into ruin. Elena took a step back, shaking off the burning sensation, her jaw clenched. If he wanted to continue, she would let him. But he would be the one to pay the price. The sergeant charged again, his body swaying between exhaustion and fury. Reckless, desperate. She let him come. And at the exact moment he lunged, she dodged and attacked from the side in a quick and sharp movement. Before he knew it, her arm was already around his neck. A military-style cervical control technique, precise and efficient. She pulled him back firmly, her forearm pressing against his throat, her body fitting behind his with the precision of years of repeated training. Brooks choked. He immediately ran out of breath. His hand searched for her arm, his nails scratching her skin, desperately trying to break free from the iron grip. Elena wrapped her legs around his waist, stabilizing him. Each of his attempts to break free only strengthened her grip. "It's over, Brooks," she said, her voice calm, almost distant. "You're finished." He struggled, kicking the asphalt, the rough sound of his shoes echoing on the empty road. But she didn't let him go. Panic gripped him, the primal instinct of someone who feels the air disappearing. The movements became erratic. The strength was slipping from his arms. His body trembled, his breathing turning into hoarse, broken noises. Elena maintained a firm grip, not out of cruelty, but out of justice. His pride had led him there, but pride could not sustain a body on the verge of collapse. His lungs were begging for air, his muscles were failing, and his world was beginning to darken. Her legs, which had been restless, became still. His fists, previously clenched, opened. Then came the sound she had been waiting for, a broken, muffled plea. "Please." Elena didn't move. "What was that?" she asked coldly. "Please, let me go," he stammered, his voice weak and desperate. She maintained control for a few more seconds, enough for him to feel the weight of his own choice. Then he let him go, His body collapsed onto the asphalt, gasping, coughing violently, the sound of his lungs struggling to recover echoing on the silent road. Elena stood up, shrugged, and took a deep breath. Her ribs ached, her jaw throbbed, but she was all in one piece. While he trembled on the ground, it was he who was in ruins. For the first time, his gaze had changed. There was no more rage. There was fear, not just of her, but of what she had become. She took a step forward, watching him flinch, his eyes wide, his breath ragged. She didn't attack him. It wasn't necessary. The lesson had already been taught. "You brought this on yourself," she said, her voice low and calm. "You could have left Brooks, you could have moved on. But he didn't follow through. And now he's here." The words fell like a sentence. In the silence near the Everglades, only the sound of the wind answered, and Sergeant Brooks, sprawled on the asphalt, finally understood what it meant to lose. Sergeant Brooks swallowed hard, his throat irritated, his shoulders slumped as if carrying the weight of all the wrong choices that had brought him there. For a moment he seemed small, a man stripped of his own arrogance, crushed by reality. But the silence of Interstate 95 South held surprises. Suddenly, something changed. His breathing steadied. His fingers moved against the asphalt, and before Major Elena Rivera realized it, he lunged forward, running toward the car. Elena watched him for a second that seemed to stretch on in time. It wasn't an escape, it was despair. His body trembled, his breath was an uneven trickle of hot air, but his mind still clung to an illusion. The idea that he could escape, that if he got to the car, he could pretend he still had some control. But Elena wasn't going to allow it. Instinct spoke before thought. His muscles contracted, his body moved like an automatic command line. Within seconds, she was behind him, her feet pounding firmly on the asphalt, the precise cadence of a soldier in pursuit. Brooks caught up to the car, a silver sedan, a familiar sight to the department's unmarked vehicles. His fingers touched the doorknob. But before she could open the door, Elena emerged from the side, her palm striking the metal and slamming it shut. The impact echoed with a dry, metallic sound. Before he could react, her elbow dug into his ribs, eliciting a muffled groan from him. His body slammed against the car, the air escaping in a sharp sound, almost a scream. He collapsed onto the hood, his legs wobbly, his body succumbing to exhaustion. Elena moved slowly, positioning herself between him and any escape route. His black Chevy Tahoe was right behind him, blocking the exit. He was trapped, breathless, out of uniform, powerless. "Have you finished running?" she asked, her tone serene, sharp as a clean blade. Brooks tried to speak, but the sound died in his throat. She swallowed hard, her body trembling. Silence was his answer. Elena tilted her head slightly, her eyes fixed on him. "Did you really think you'd get away with all this?" His jaw clenched, but there was no longer any fire in his eyes. Not a spark of defiance, not a trace of the arrogance that drove him. All that remained was the naked, cold, inevitable defeat. She took a step forward, the firm sound of her military boot echoing down the road. He recoiled reflexively, his back hitting the car. You could have left Brooks. He could have accepted defeat and moved on with his life. But you don't know what it means to stop, do you? His hands trembled, his fingers trying to find strength where there was none left. His breathing was a trembling sigh, the sound of a man trying to justify the unjustifiable, and failing. Elena noticed the tension in his shoulders, the weight shifting discreetly forward. Even now, he was looking for one last move, one final blow. She sighed. Don't do that. But he did. His body lurched in a desperate movement, the last glimmer of pride disguised as courage. Elena saw it before it even happened. In an instant, she swerved to the side, her arm grabbing his in midair and twisting with surgical precision. His body slammed against the hood with force, the metallic sound echoing like a death sentence. Brooks grunted, his face pressed against the hot metal, his muscles trembling under the weight of his own body. Elena maintained control, her forearm firmly pressing his hands against the hood. He leaned in, his face just inches from his, and said softly, in a firm voice, without anger, without hesitation, "You lost, Brooks. It's over." A muffled curse escaped his lips, but there was no more resistance. His body trembled, not from strength but from exhaustion. His hands slipped, his shoulders slumped. Elena held it there for a few seconds, enough time for him to feel the weight of his own ruin. Nothing theatrical, nothing heroic, just the stark truth of a man defeated by himself. When he finally let go, he collapsed against the hood, his forehead hitting the metal, his whole body gasping. The sound of his breathing was uneven, the sound of someone who no longer believes in what he has become. Elena took a step back, a slight twist of her wrists, releasing the tension in her muscles. The wind blew across the deserted road. She stood there watching him, the perfect symbol of a power that had crumbled. The scene seemed frozen. The hunched man, the imaginary uniform he was still trying to carry, and the woman who didn't need to prove anything anymore. Elena's ribs still burned where Sergeant Brooks had hit her, and her jaw remained tense from the impact, but compared to what he had just endured, that was nothing. She tilted her head slightly, her gaze fixed on him. Brooks remained motionless, his hands inert against the hot metal of the silver sedan, his entire body radiating defeat. "You really should know better," she said calmly and firmly. "Men like you always think they can do whatever they want. They think they can abuse their power, intimidate people, control everything by force, and for a while, they succeed." Elena took a step back, her voice lower, almost a cutting whisper. "But that ends today." Brooks did not respond. He remained there, leaning against the car, his chest heaving with ragged breaths, his hands tapped weakly against the hood, his fingers trembling, as if still searching for a strength that no longer existed. The struggle had left him with nothing, only the weight of his own mistakes crushing him like an anchor. Elena took a deep breath, letting the moment linger, allowing reality to fully impose itself. Then, with the serenity of someone who maintains absolute control, she reached into her pocket and pulled out her cell phone. Her fingers glided across the screen, precise and steady. When the call was answered, his voice came out professional, ruthless. "This is Major Elena Rivera of the United States Army. I need Florida Department of Law Enforcement units immediately on Interstate 95 South, near the Everglades exit, mile 245. I'm reporting an assault and attempted homicide in traffic. The suspect is in custody and is not cooperating." Brooks' body stiffened. For the first time since the end of the fight, he moved, a nervous jolt, almost a spasm. Elena ignored him, continuing, "Yes, the suspect is a police officer." "Sergeant Brooks, that's right. I'll give my full statement when the team arrives. Ask for backup and a film crew. I want everything documented." She ended the call calmly and put the phone away. The movements were precise, calculated, like a sentence being signed. Brooks shifted, his hands pressing harder against the hood. His breathing had become irregular, panic finally replacing anger. "Wait," he murmured, his voice hoarse, almost inaudible. Elena watched him sideways, her expression impassive. He swallowed hard, his shattered pride trying to recompose itself in disjointed words. "Anything. You don't have to do this." His voice trembled. "You've already won." Elena sighed, a small gesture of exhaustion and contempt at the same time. "And what exactly do you think is going to happen now?" He tried to answer, but nothing came out. Even now, faced with the inevitable, he could not accept the end. Elena stepped forward. "You came after me. You tried to run me off the road. You attacked me. The situation escalated, and this was the only way to end it. And now, Because you couldn't control yourself, you'll be held accountable for everything." "You don't need to," he tried, his voice choked with emotion. "No," she interrupted, "you don't have the right to beg now." The words hit him like a cold blade. The silence that followed was the weight of the truth falling upon him, slow, inevitable. He had thought that if he could control her, he could erase what had happened at the department headquarters, that he could rewrite history, restore lost authority. But instead he sealed his own downfall. That's when the sound appeared, sirens in the distance, cutting through the cold morning air. First, a distant echo, then the growing sound of approach. The roar of police cars echoed down the road. Brooks's jaw clenched, his hands trembled. Elena watched as the last vestige of resistance dissolved. The blue and red lights began to flash, reflecting off the car's metal and Brooks's sweaty skin. 3 vehicles appeared around the bend, their tires screeching against the asphalt as they came to a sudden stop. Doors opened, quick footsteps, coordinated voices. Elena took a step back, hands relaxed at her sides, posture erect, absolute control. There was no need to say anything. The scene spoke for itself. One of the police officers approached, Lieutenant Marcus Hale, a middle-aged man with a hard, experienced look. He quickly analyzed the scene, the ground, the damage, the faces, his eyes fixed on Elena. There was something in his gaze, respect and recognition. He nodded slightly. "Major Rivera," he said in a serious but restrained tone. "We're already taking over." Elena simply tilted her head. "Make sure he receives the necessary medical treatment and that everything is documented." Hale nodded again, the radio crackling in his hand. "Yes, ma'am." While the other police officers surrounded the area, Elena stepped back a few paces, her eyes fixed on the horizon. The road was still bathed in the soft morning light, as if the world, indifferent, continued on in peace. But behind her, the sound of handcuffs echoed, a metallic, final click, a symbol of justice. As a consequence, the end. She didn't look back. It wasn't necessary. The truth had already been revealed. "Major Rivera," greeted Lieutenant Hale, professional and attentive. "Dispatch said it was serious." Elena nodded only once. "And even." He pointed to Sergeant Brooks, still leaning against the silver sedan, his eyes burning with a mixture of anger and helplessness. "This man chased me on the highway. He tried to run me off the road. His intention was clear, to hurt me. I was just defending myself. I stopped him. Now he's yours." Hale's gaze hardened. He turned slowly toward Brooks, understanding from Elena's expression who was really standing before him. Brooks lifted his head with effort, his teeth clenched, his face pale and tense. "Really?" Hale murmured, tilting his head slightly. His tone was calm, but contempt poured from his eyes. He made a hand gesture. "Handcuff him." 2 police officers advanced without hesitation. Brooks stiffened, his body reacting instinctively, but he didn't resist. His arms were pulled back, the handcuffs snapping into place with a dry metallic click. The sound echoed down Interstate 95 like the final period of a sentence. Elena watched impassively. The man before her was no longer a police officer. He was merely the result of her own arrogance. The lieutenant shook his head, murmuring, "You've gotten yourself into a really bad mess, buddy." Brooks did not respond. He was pushed towards the vehicle, his body bent over, his gaze vacant. But before going in, he raised his head and looked at her one last time. For a moment, Elena saw what remained of him, the hatred still alive, but now accompanied by fear. She held his gaze, her voice firm, without needing to raise her tone. "You did this to yourself." The car door slammed shut, and with the dry sound of the engine starting up, Sergeant Brooks was taken away. Elena took a deep breath. The blue and red lights danced on the asphalt, reflecting off the bodywork of his black Chevy Tahoe. The police officers approached to collect her statement. Everything was accurately recorded: the location, the damage, the account. No loopholes, no ambiguities. When the last officer put away the notepad, Hale turned around. "Are you all right, Mom?" he asked, in a tone that sounded more like acknowledgement than doubt. Elena nodded. "I will be." She turned and walked to her car, her steps firm, the wind blowing lightly along the road. The weight of the past was beginning to dissipate. The battle was over, but the war was not. Because Elena knew. Men like Brooks didn't disappear quietly. They survived in the shadow of their own privileges, sustained by systems that had learned to protect the guilty and punish the righteous. But she wasn't the type of woman to back down from that. The next day, the process began. Elena gave a full statement at the Florida Department of Police Regional Headquarters, recounting every detail. The officers were professional. Some even apologized. But she knew that the real danger began there, behind the scenes. A man like Brooks always had connections, people within the department willing to distort, soften, and transform the truth into noise, and she wasn't going to allow it. As soon as he left the barracks, he picked up the phone and made 2 calls. The first one was for his lawyer. She wanted the formal charges filed that very morning. Assault, attempted manslaughter in a traffic accident, and reckless conduct that endangered lives. He provided all the evidence, the recordings from the Chevy Tahoe's dashcam, the call logs, the marks on the asphalt. Every detail reinforces what no one else could deny. The second call was to Derek Langford, a veteran Miami reporter known for his reporting on abuses of power. She knew that the truth needed to go beyond the court records. It needed to be public. Within hours, the story exploded in the press. Websites, radio stations, and television news programs reported Florida police officer under investigation for attempted murder of a U.S. Army officer. Brooks' name spread like wildfire. The dashcam footage showed the car trying to push her vehicle off the road, the chase, the confrontation, and the outcome. Social media was buzzing. Hashtags have multiplied. Justice for Rivera, one end impunity, one strength and honor. And for the first time in a long time, the country was watching. No to impunity, but to a woman who refused to be silenced. Previously punished police officer faces new charges. History of complaints resurfaces. Did the system protect a repeat offender? These were the headlines that echoed across all Miami news portals that morning. Sergeant Brooks's name was everywhere. This time, not as a law enforcement officer, but as the face of institutional shame. Major Elena Rivera didn't need to say a word. The facts spoke for themselves. Brooks was found to have an extensive criminal record accumulated over many years. Complaints of racial discrimination, excessive use of force, abuse of authority, and intimidation of civilians, all conveniently filed away. Superficial reports, internal investigations that led nowhere, silent transfers that merely changed the address of impunity. But this time it would be different. There would be no new transfer. There would be no second chance. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement's internal investigation began almost immediately. Officials who had previously protected him now scrambled to distance themselves, anxious to appear correct, concerned about their own image. The culture of silence dissolved under the weight of cameras, videos, evidence, and public pressure. Brooks was suspended indefinitely while Internal Affairs investigated the case. But Elena already knew the outcome. With the country watching, with newspapers publishing every detail, and with criminal charges piling up against him, there was no way to save his career. At the end of the week, the official dismissal came. At the end of the month, the trial date was set. Elena did not celebrate. It wasn't necessary. That wasn't victory. It was justice. It was a guarantee that men like Brooks would never again use a badge as a weapon. When the official statement from the Florida Department of Police was released, confirming the expulsion, Elena simply sighed, feeling the weight of it all dissipate. She had done what needed to be done, and he had lost everything. But Elena knew that justice doesn't end with a dismissal. Men like Brooks always try to come back. She had seen this script before. Disgraced police officers being rehired in other cities, private security companies hiring veterans to intimidate, police tactics consultancies opened by people who should be behind bars. That wouldn't happen this time. Elena filed a civil lawsuit in the Florida Superior Court, seeking compensation for her injuries, the bruised ribs, the injured jaw, and the physical and psychological trauma. The lawsuit also included damages to his vehicle, a Chevy Tahoe, which was struck during the chase. But compensation wasn't the main issue. It was the symbol. She wanted to ensure that Brooks had nowhere else to start over, that every attempt to reinvent oneself would be stifled by one's own record. May every company, every department, every security agency that researched its name find the permanent stain of its ruin. And that's what happened. As soon as the lawsuit became public, the Miami Herald, the Sun Sentinel, and WSVN-TV highlighted the news. Army Major files lawsuit against former Florida police officer for assault and attempted murder. The comments multiplied. The streets, WhatsApp groups, forums, and social media were buzzing. The reactions were explosive. The entire country seemed divided. On one side, there were those who called her a heroine, those who saw in her the courage that so many others lacked. People who understood what Elena always knew: if she were any other woman, without a uniform, without rank, without proof, she would have become just another number. She was celebrated for standing firm, for not giving in, to show the United States that not all symbols of power belong to those who shout the loudest. She not only took down an aggressor, she disarmed the system that protected him. But there were others too, those who refused to see, those who said she should have obeyed, that he was only doing his duty, that the press persecutes good police officers, those who repeated the same worn-out rhetoric as always, another innocent person destroyed by politics and the media. Comments piled up, revealing the best and worst of the country. On one hand, there is recognition. On the other hand, there is voluntary blindness. And Elena, upon reading all of this, felt not anger, she felt clarity. Because now, more than ever, she understood the magnitude of the battle she was fighting, and for the first time, she was no longer fighting alone. Women like her think they can get away with anything. The phrase echoed across radio programs, online forums, and social media for weeks. None of that surprised Elena Rivera. She was expecting it. He knew exactly how the world reacted when men like Sergeant Brooks were finally held accountable. There was always a segment of the population willing to ignore the evidence, to distort the facts, to fit their old beliefs, in their prejudices that seemed immortal. But Elena remained unfazed. She had spent years in conflict zones, in places where life and death were separated by seconds, where every decision had real and irreversible consequences. The opinions of those who have never fought for anything, from those who only defend their own manufactured outrage, they meant nothing to her. Elena did not give interviews. He refused invitations to debates. It wasn't necessary. The facts spoke for themselves. Brooks chased after her. He tried to push her off the track. He tried to hurt her, maybe even kill her. And when the emblem ceased to be a shield, when he had to face alone the woman who tried to dominate him, he lost. That was the truth. And no amount of denialism, biased headlines, or tired rhetoric would change that. His name was ruined, his career ruined. And now, with the criminal proceedings underway and all doors closed, Sergeant Brooks had nowhere to go. No turning back, no disguise, no excuse. Elena went on with her life. indifferent to the noise, immune to attacks, firm in the conviction that he did what was right. He wasn't looking for applause or headlines. He sought justice, and justice didn't need an audience. Judgment Day arrived, burdened by the weight of inevitability. For weeks, Miami had been buzzing with anticipation. The national press covered the case. Former Florida police sergeant accused of attempted murder against a U.S. Army officer will stand trial in court today. The courtroom was packed. The crowd jostled for a seat. Cameras, microphones, flashes, all focused on that hall, which for one day seemed like the center of the country. Elena entered with the same posture she had maintained from the beginning. Shoulders straight, expression calm, gaze firm. He wasn't seeking revenge. I was looking for consistency. On the other side, Brooks, accompanied by two lawyers. He stared at the ground, his jaw clenched. His expression was that of a man who still believed he could win. I still believed that with the right argument or a technical slip-up, he would emerge unscathed, but there was no longer any possible illusion. The evidence was relentless. Prosecutor Victor Lang stood up, his voice firm and calm. The screens lit up, displaying images from the Chevy Tahoe's dashcam. The room fell silent. There, in front of everyone, was the complete sequence: the chase on Interstate 95, the advance of the silver sedan, the side impact, Elena's defensive maneuver, and finally, the brutal fight by the roadside. Every second dismantled the myth. Each image showed Brooks's true face, not the exemplary police officer, but the aggressor driven by hatred and arrogance. Subsequent testimonies only reinforced the weight of the evidence. Colleagues who had previously defended him were now backing down, trying to save their own reputations. The department's Internal Affairs Division had unearthed years of suppressed complaints. It was the public collapse of a structure that, for a long time, preferred protecting the uniform to protecting the truth. When the prosecutor called Elena to the witness stand, she stood up without hesitation. Each step toward the podium echoed in the wooden hall, and when he sat down, the silence was absolute. Brooks's gaze followed her, tense, searching for a flaw, a hesitation, a fear. But Elena had none of that. She had already faced far more dangerous enemies than him. "Major Rivera," the prosecutor began, "can you describe the events of that morning?" Elena took a deep breath, her voice coming out firm, technical, controlled. "I was on my way to the barracks, following my usual route along Interstate 95. I noticed the lights flashing behind me and pulled over, as any citizen would do. But I soon realized that Sergeant Brooks had no legal justification for the approach." The prosecutor nodded, walking slowly before the jury. "And how did you arrive at that conclusion?" Elena kept her gaze fixed. "I asked directly the reason for the stop." He didn't answer. Instead, he questioned whether I was really in the military. He doubted my patent and began to raise his voice, trying to turn an irregular approach into a confrontation. The court remained silent, no sound other than reporters typing and chairs creaking. Brooks looked away. He knew that nothing else could save him. Prosecutor Sarah Klein turned to the jury, letting her words echo through the packed Florida courtroom. The air seemed thick, heavy with attention and expectation. Then she turned her gaze to Elena Rivera, who remained serene in the witness box. "Major Rivera, did you ever have reason to believe that this was a routine police stop?" Elena's gaze did not waver. "No." "And why?" "Because he treated me like a suspect the moment he saw me," she replied firmly, each word carefully measured. That wasn't obeying the law. It was a show of power. A murmur echoed through the courtroom. Sergeant Brooks, seated at the defense table, clenched his jaw. The veins in his neck bulged. He hated hearing her talk like that. He hated how each of her sentences dismantled him piece by piece in front of the entire country. The prosecutor maintained her composure, simply nodding. "And when you didn't react as he expected, what happened?" He increased the pressure, Elena replied, her voice calm but firm. He started threatening me, trying to intimidate me. When he realized that wasn't working, he forced me out of the car for no reason. And did you obey? No, I exercised my right to remain in the vehicle until he presented a legitimate reason. Elena paused briefly, taking a deep breath before continuing. He reacted violently. He threatened me with arrest and soon after proceeded to conduct an illegal search, rummaging through my belongings. The prosecutor stepped forward. And did you find anything? Nothing. But even so, he refused to release me. He didn't want justice. He wanted control. That's all. The room fell silent. The tension was palpable, almost physical. Brooks fidgeted in his chair, unable to hide the hatred that burned in his eyes. And what happened after his suspension, Major? The prosecutor asked, her tone now more serious. Elena looked up. He found me again. Her voice echoed like a restrained punch. He used his car to follow me. He cornered me on a deserted stretch of Interstate 95 and tried to run me off the road. Do you believe he intended to hurt you? Elena tilted her head slightly. I don't believe it. I know. He tried to kill me. A murmur swept through the courtroom, accompanied by discreet flashes from the press. Brooks's defense team was in turmoil. He himself stiffened, as if struggling to contain his fury. The prosecutor nodded calmly. And when you were forced to react, what was his response? Elena crossed her hands in her lap. He didn't stop. Even when it was clear he couldn't win, he kept going. I gave him several chances to leave. He refused. He was no longer fighting for survival. He was fighting for control. And what do men like him do when they lose control? The prosecutor asked. Elena turned her neck slowly, looking Brooks directly in her eyes for the first time. They run away. The sound of the word seemed to cut through the air. The sergeant clenched his fists, his eyes flashing. It was the first time she had publicly acknowledged him, and that destroyed him more than any physical blow. The prosecutor turned to the judge. No further questions, Your Honor. Elena stepped down from the bench, her steps firm and measured. He didn't look at Brooks. He no longer deserved even her gaze. The following days were long. The trial dragged on with testimonies, evidence, and witnesses. But the truth had already prevailed. Brooks' past was exposed, thread by thread. Reports of racial discrimination, abuses of power, dismissed complaints. It all came to light. Everything became impossible to deny. Still, he remained there, tense, rigid, with the same look of someone who refuses to learn. Judge Nathan Hale, a man with a calm voice and an implacable expression, he adjusted his glasses and stared at the defendant. Before this court proceeds to sentencing, he said, the defendant has the right to speak. A murmur ran through the room. Reporters leaned over their notebooks. Cameras focused on Brooks' face. That was the moment, the last chance for redemption, or the ultimate act of arrogance. Elena crossed her legs, observing expressionlessly. She already knew what his choice would be. Brooks stood up slowly, his jacket crumpled, his gaze cold. He glanced around the room, at the audience, the judges, the cameras, and finally, for the woman who had faced him without fear, his voice came out hoarse, scratchy but full of pride. I was doing my job. The silence that followed was deafening. The words hung in the air, hollow, devoid of any weight. Elena remained motionless, watching. That was it. Until the end, he would remain blind. Sergeant Brooks let out a heavy sigh, his hands gripping the sides of the defense table. The white, tense knuckles of his fingers betrayed what he was trying to hide with his haughty gaze. They can say whatever they want about me. They can cite all the complaints, all the investigations, all the times a civilian thought I was too harsh, too aggressive, too impulsive. He paused. The tone of his voice changed, deepening, hardening, laden with pent-up anger. "But none of you have ever worn this uniform. None of you know what it's like out there." The atmosphere in the courtroom changed immediately. The air grew heavier. Some jurors exchanged silent glances. Prosecutor Sarah Klein leaned back slightly in her chair, watching as Brooks dug deeper into his own defense. "Every day I would put on this uniform and leave without knowing if I would return home. Every approach could be the last, every call an ambush. And you expect me to hesitate? You expect me to ignore my instincts?" His eyes flickered briefly to Elena Rivera before returning to Judge Nathan Hale. "I saw a situation and acted the way I was trained. Do you really think I'm the only police officer who would have done what I did?" Elena remained serene, her face impassive. But deep down, she knew what she was seeing. It wasn't regret. It was denial. The old mask of pride trying to transform a crime into a duty. The judge paused briefly, as if offering him one last moment to understand the magnitude of his own mistake. Then he spoke, calm, articulate, yet sharp as a blade. "You claim to have acted as a police officer, Sergeant Brooks, but the evidence presented in this court shows something quite different. What we saw here was not instinct. It was a systematic, deliberate, and personal abuse of power." Brooks' jaw clenched, but he remained silent. "You didn't pursue Major Elena Rivera because she posed a threat," the judge continued. "You pursued her because she didn't submit. Because a black woman, and even more so a decorated officer in the United States Army, dared not bow her head before his authority." A murmur echoed through the room. The audience stirred. The cameras shook discreetly in the reporters' hands. It was the truth spoken aloud. And once it was said, there was no going back. The judge leaned slightly over the bench. "You showed no remorse. He showed no remorse. And until now, he hasn't even acknowledged the harm he caused." The silence that followed was absolute. Elena could feel the air vibrating around her. It was the sound of justice finally being served, without embellishment, without metaphors. "Given the seriousness of his actions," Judge Hale continued, "this court imposes the maximum penalty allowed by law." The room seemed to hold its breath. Time stretched on, and then the words came, firm, cold, irreversible. "Sergeant Harlan Brooks, you are sentenced to 15 years in prison for the crimes of attempted manslaughter while driving a motor vehicle, aggravated assault, and abuse of power under the pretext of authority. As of today, you lose all rights and privileges related to your police career and are permanently prohibited from holding any public office or position in the security field." Brooks's body seemed to collapse from the inside. The color drained from her face. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. 15 years. The sentence echoed within him like a muffled gunshot, growing until it becomes a deafening noise. The dry sound of the judge's gavel striking the wood sealed a fate he had never believed possible. 2 U.S. Marshals officers approached immediately, without ceremony, no rush, without mercy. One held her left arm, the other her right. Brooks resisted for a second, just one, before giving in to the inevitable. He raised his head, his gaze lost among the lights of the courtroom, and he found her. Elena, sitting, serene, impenetrable. And for the first time since the beginning of it all, there was no hatred in his eyes. There was no rage. There was no arrogance. There was only the emptiness of a man who finally understood the magnitude of his own ruin. Elena held his gaze, without pride, without satisfaction. She didn't need to win, because the truth had already won for her. He had done that to himself. Her lips were slightly parted, her throat moving as if there was still something to say. One last argument, one last excuse, one last attempt to maintain control. But no one listened to him anymore. 2 U.S. Marshals pulled him back, firmly, mechanically. With his hands cuffed, shoulders hunched, and steps shuffling, Sergeant Brooks was led to the exit of the Florida courthouse, where his authority, his power, and the future he had once envisioned for himself had ceased to exist. Major Elena Rivera stood up slowly, her heart heavy but serene. She took a deep breath, feeling the warm Miami air fill the room and mingle with the weight of everything she had lived through. Months of struggle, months of exposure, fear, anger, and resilience, and now justice. Upon taking the first step towards the exit doors, the sounds of the courtroom faded behind her. Muffled voices, creaking chairs, the distant murmur of the press, all of that, in short, belonged to the past. The atmosphere was different at Coleman Federal Prison. Cold, dry, impersonal. Brooks was sitting in the cell, leaning against the metal bench, hands marked by the friction of the recently removed handcuffs. The bare, expressionless concrete walls seemed to slowly close in around him. The distant sound of automatic doors echoed through the corridors like a cruel reminder that their freedom was a thing of the past. He could still hear in his mind the dry crack of the judge's gavel, the subdued murmur from the audience, the sound of cameras capturing his fall. Everything happened too fast to understand. For years, the sergeant had convinced himself that men like him didn't fall. The system had always protected him. Internal investigations shielded him. His colleagues covered for him. Every complaint was silenced, every excess justified, every abuse forgotten. He believed he was untouchable, but that illusion shattered the moment he was forced to listen to Elena Rivera speak. Her clarity disarmed him. The serenity with which he presented it shattered him. During the trial, he believed he could reverse the narrative, pretending to be a victim, manipulating headlines, planting doubts. But the facts were unforgiving, and the weight of the truth crushed him. His fingers closed over the rough fabric of the orange uniform, the nails digging into the flesh. His mind was spinning in a whirlwind of bitterness and denial. How had things come to this point? How many others had done worse and gotten away with it? How many had simply been transferred, renamed, or forgotten? But somehow he doesn't. He was the example. The case was used to show that the system sometimes punished its own people. That idea was eating him up inside. And the anger returned, burning in his stomach. If Elena had only stepped back, if he had obeyed, if she had known her place, none of this would have happened. She had challenged him, humiliated, naked in front of everyone, and even now, inside that cold cell, he still hated her for it. But hatred changed nothing. Not even the metallic sound of the doors, not even the memory of the judge coldly saying his name, nor the fact that Major Elena Rivera had won, because deep down he knew he was wrong. His own arrogance had guided him step by step to ruin. Every choice, every provocation, every abuse, everything piled up until there was nothing left. And now it was too late. The silence of the cell devoured him. Loneliness crushed any remaining sense of superiority. For the first time in his life, Brooks understood what it meant to be powerless. Outside, Eleanor stood on the steps of the courthouse. The sun was beginning to set over the city, painting the sky orange and blue. The warm wind whipped against her face, firm, liberating. She looked around, taking a deep breath. The trial was over. The fight was over. But what was being concluded, there was much more than just a case. It was the cycle of silence that so many had been forced to endure. And finally, someone had broken that cycle. Elena wasn't thinking about winning. I was thinking about responsibility, in everything that still needed to change. But for a moment, he allowed himself to feel the lightness of knowing that, at least for today, the truth had prevailed. She took another step forward, her gaze fixed on the horizon, knowing that her battle was not just for herself, but for all those who never had the chance to be heard. It was never just a one-off case, a one-off moment, or an isolated incident. This was a bigger battle, one that so many women had fought before her, and one that would continue long after that day. Sergeant Brooks had finally been held accountable, stripped of his rank, his influence, everything he used to exert power over others. His name, once synonymous with authority and respect, was now associated with shame and ruin. The badge that had once protected him had become just a broken symbol, a reminder of what happens when arrogance crosses the line of the law. But even knowing that he would spend years in Coleman Federal Prison, Major Elena Rivera understood that this fight would never truly end. She had seen this cycle before. Men like him always find defenders. There are always those who distort the facts, who prefer to protect their own worldview rather than face the truth. There are always those who say he was wronged, that he was a political role model, that he paid too high a price. There would be a reaction. There would be resistance. There always is. But Elena didn't care. She didn't go all the way there to gain approval. She arrived to ensure that justice prevailed, clearly, unequivocally, and irrefutably. Brooks had every opportunity to demonstrate remorse, every chance of admitting what he had done, but he refused every single one of them. His pride was his downfall, and now all that remained was to live with the consequences. Elena took a few slow steps toward the Florida courthouse parking lot. Upright posture, calm expression. The road ahead would not be easy, but it never had been. She had learned that real change requires resistance, and there was no resistance that could make her back down. He stopped beside the car, looked up at the Miami sky, and took a deep breath. It was like someone who, for the first time in a long time, was allowing themselves to breathe without the weight of the world on their shoulders. The fight was not over, but that battle had been won. And for now, that was enough. Elena never sought recognition. She had spent years serving in the United States Army, driven by duty and integrity, never for applause. She did what needed to be done because it was the right thing to do, and that was always enough. But in the weeks following the trial, the repercussions were inevitable. With the media pressure easing, recognition came even though she didn't want it. The Department of Defense issued a public statement praising his conduct. They highlighted his discipline, composure, and professionalism, the way she confronted injustice without letting emotion overwhelm her. The United States Armed Forces followed the case closely, and many officers saw in Elena an example of what it means to act with courage without betraying the uniform. She didn't react with anger. It wasn't reckless. He followed protocol, recording every piece of evidence, and let the system function as it should. Some of his superiors called him personally. Thank you for the example. Others admitted that his stance would serve as an inspiration to new officers. But for Elena, the real victory wasn't in the headlines. Neither in the tributes nor in the messages of support that arrived from all over the country. The victory lay in the fact that she remained steadfast, for refusing to remain silent in the face of a man who was abusing his authority, for having ensured that the system for the first time did not turn a blind eye. She returned to base days later, as if nothing had changed. His uniform still fit him perfectly. His pace was the same. But there was something different in his gaze, the clarity of someone who understands the price of truth. She didn't talk about Brooks unless she was asked about it, and even then, their answers were brief, definitive. There was nothing more to say. As Elena continued on her way, Brooks remained trapped in the rubble of his own ego. The press was relentless. His name became synonymous with misfortune. No corporation would hire him again. No security company, no consulting firm, no public office. The Florida Department of Police, which had protected him for years, he made a point of distancing himself. Now he was an embarrassment to be forgotten. The same colleagues who had previously defended him now avoided even mentioning his name. For years, he had believed himself to be untouchable. I thought that simply wearing the badge was enough to escape the consequences. But time proved otherwise. Now all that remained were 4 cold walls, a heavy silence, and a name that had become synonymous with downfall. In the base office, Elena reviewed reports, engrossed in thought. Outside, the sound of helicopters and military voices mingled in the late afternoon. The world hadn't stopped because of that, and neither does she. The battle had been long. The exhaustion was real, but justice had been served. She sees what unchecked power can do. Turn around and see what happens when someone confuses authority with dominance, respect mixed with fear, and he believed above all that no one is above the law. Justice had been served, not only in court, but simply because Brooks had lost everything. Elena watched the sun setting over the base, golden light spreading through the window. He let out a slow, deep, final sigh. There was no more war to fight. There was no more debt to the past. The chapter had come to an end, and she was finally free to move on. Some stories speak louder than any speech, stories that remind us that justice is not just a word, but a choice, one that requires courage, discipline, and often solitude. Major Elena Rivera wasn't seeking glory. She was seeking what so many still hope to find, a system that works, a law that protects, a truth that prevails. When a symbol of power falls, the world watches. Some applaud, others question, but the essential point remains, the certainty that no one is above responsibility for their own actions. What happened here was not just the end of a case, but the beginning of a change, a reminder that when someone has the courage to confront abuse, the entire system is forced to look at itself. If you've made it this far, think about what this story represents. Leave a comment below telling us where you're watching from and what has impressed you most about this journey. Take this opportunity to leave a like. It helps this message reach more people. And subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next stories of strength, truth, and justice, because in the end, that's what it's all about. It's not about the power that is lost, but about the dignity that is gained.